Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Economics Simplified with Miss Ellen. Today's video is a continuation of my previous video that is on the theory of production, where we talked about production, the method of production, and then we also explained some terminologies in the short run production theory. Remember to subscribe to my channel, you like, you share, and then you leave a comment below. Today we are continuing with the theory of production. So this is the theory of production part 2. Objectives of the day. We are going to explain the law of diminishing marginal returns. Then we'll show the relationship between the total product, the marginal product, and the average product. Then lastly, we'll explain the stages of production. So we explain the law of diminishing marginal returns. The law is also known as the law of variable proportion. The law of variable proportion. Now, if you are asked to state a law in economics, never forget to bring the phrase, all other things being equal. Now, the law of diminishing marginal return states that all other things being equal, as more and more of a variable input, that is labor, is added to work on a fixed input, which is land, the marginal product of the variable input, which is labor, initially rises, reaches a maximum, and then eventually falls. So that is the law. Now, this law explains why the short-run curves behave the way they do. The indicator to the law of diminishing marginal return is the marginal product. So whatever happens to the marginal product tells whether the law has actually taken place or not. Now we look at the behavior of the marginal product. Initially, the marginal product increases. Then it reaches a maximum point, that is the highest productivity. Then it begins to fall to the extent that it enters the negative zone. So these are the characteristics of this is how the marginal product behaves. Now, if you want to know when the law of diminishing marginal return actually sets in or takes place, that is when you realize that the marginal product has started falling, or the situation where marginal product begins to fall, then you know that something is happening. That is what the law of diminishing marginal return has taken place. Now, to further explain this law, or to break down the law of diminishing marginal return, we explain using return to factor. Now, let me say this. The law of diminishing marginal return takes place in the short-run production theory, where at least a factor of production is what fixed, and then another factor varies. So it means that it does not take place in the long run. Now let's explain the return to factor. It refers to a short-run production situation where changes in a factor or input known as labor brings about changes in output. The output here refers to the marginal product. So when marginal product is changing, it is changing as a result of what? A change in a factor or a change in inputs, which is labor. That is the return to factor. Now we have types of return to factor, or the forms of return to factor. With this, we have 3 types of return to factor. That is the increasing return to factor, we have the constant return to factor, then the diminishing return to factor. So basically, we have 3 types of return to factor. But then the diminishing return to factor, it's further divided into 2. That is decreasing return to factor, and then we have increasing return to factor. So in other words, we are explaining that is 4 types of return to factor. Now we take the first one, which is increasing return to factor. This is where an increase in an input, we are referring to labor, brings about an increase in the marginal product. In other words, marginal product is increasing or marginal product is changing as a result of an increase in an input, which is what labor. Now, if you really want to understand the types of return to factor, the name or the type of the return to factor will tell you what is happening to the marginal product. So since we are talking about an increase, that is an increase in return to factor, it means that the marginal product is increasing, but then it is increasing as a result of an increase in an input or an increase in the factor, that is labor. Then let's look at the next type of return to factor. That is the constant return to factor, CRF. This is where an increase in an input brings about the same change or no change at all in the marginal product. In other words, the marginal product is fixed, or the marginal product, it's not changing as a result of an increase in an input. So that is why it is referred to as the constant return to factor. Then we have decreasing return to factor. So as the name suggests, decreasing return to factor, meaning that the marginal product is decreasing, but it is decreasing as a result of what? An increase in an input, which is labor. Then we talk about the last one, which is negative return to factor, NRF. This is where an increase in an input brings about negative values to the marginal product. In other words, when the marginal product attains negative as a result of an increase in an input, then it means we are explaining, or we are talking about a negative return to factor. So that is how you can memorize the types of return to factor. The name will tell you what's happening to the marginal product. Now let's look at the graphical explanation of the law of diminishing marginal return. Remember, I said the indicator of the law, it's the marginal product. So whatever is happening to the marginal product shows when the law takes place. Now, this is how the marginal product behaves. As I said, it increases, it attains a maximum, begins to fall, and then eventually enters the negative zone. Now, when the marginal product is rising or increasing, it shows an increasing return to factor. Then when the marginal product attains its maximum point, it shows a constant return to factor. Then when you realize that the marginal product is falling, we have a decreasing return to factor. Then lastly, when marginal product is in the negative zone, that is, it means that we are experiencing negative return to factor. So that is the graphical representation or the graphical explanation to the law of diminishing marginal returns. Now let's look at the mathematical explanation of the law. Sometimes you'll be given a table and then they ask you to indicate where we have increasing return to factor, constant, decreasing, and then negative return to factor. Now, if you are given such a table, as I said, the indicator of the law, it's the marginal product. So we are going to concentrate more on the marginal product. Now, where we have increasing return to factor, that is the increasing return to factor starts from when labor is 1 to the third unit. So it means that if you are to indicate your increasing return to factor, that will be from 0 to 28. That is the increasing return to factor. Then we move to the next, which is constant return to factor. It takes place at the 4th unit of labor employed. We said with a constant return to factor, this is where the marginal product, it's constant, or there is no change in the marginal product. So you realize that from the 3rd unit of labor employed, the marginal product was 28. Then the 4th labor who was also employed repeated the same marginal product. So it means that there was no change when the 4th unit of labor was employed. So that is the constant return to factor. Then we have the decreasing return to factor, which begins from the 5th unit of labor employed to the 7th. So it means that you are going to indicate it starting from the 24, and then it will end at 0. Then lastly, we have the negative return to factor, which takes place at the 8th unit of labor employed. So as the name suggests, negative return to factor. So with that, it means that when the marginal product attains negative, then it means that we are having a negative return to factor. Now, in my next video, we'll talk about the stages of production and also try to know the relationship between the various variables in terms of the total product, the marginal product, and the average product. Thanks so much and have a great day. Remember to subscribe to this channel, you like, you share, and you leave the comments below. Thank you.